back to Northwest City Politics in the Know with Juanita. We're glad to welcome you back to our show again this week. We're especially glad that there are people like you out there that are interested in the cities that they live in and that surround them. So we're glad to have you with us tonight. And it's important for good government to have a good flow of information going back and forth between the city council and mayors, the city staff, and you people, the residents that live in cities. So we'll encourage you that if any of the issues we cover tonight kind of resonate with you, and you live in Robbinsdale, then be sure to take down the email and phone number for our guest. But if you live in another city, contact your city and find out what they're doing in that particular area if it's something that interests you. If you haven't watched our show before, each week we'll have somebody on from one of the 9 cities in Northwest Community Television's viewing area to talk about what are the current and up-and-coming issues that are happening in that city. And then from time to time we'll have some groups like Hennepin County Commissioners or the Northwest Human Services Council that affect all of our cities. So we're very glad to have you with us tonight, and we are here and glad to welcome as a guest Regan Murphy, who is the mayor of Robbinsdale.
Thanks for having me.
We're glad to have you with us again. It's been a little bit now.
I enjoy it, but thanks. Good to be back.
Good. And since you've been on my show before, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself. Give a little bit of information for the people that don't know you from the other cities.
Yeah, for sure. My name is Regan Murphy, born and raised in Robbinsdale. I ran for mayor in 2012 and was elected. So it's just been almost 3 years now.
Uh-huh.
And I've got 3 kids that are Delaney, Mac, and Declan that are 11, 9, and 5. And my wife, Chris, she's a kindergarten teacher. And I moved back to Robbinsdale in 2010, wanted to raise my kids there, and next thing you know, I got involved, kind of like you're talking about.
Right.
Wanted to make a difference and give a little bit back, and next thing you know, I decided to run for mayor, and here we are.
Right. Moving forward.
Yeah, and doing a lot of good things. It's been a lot of work. It's been exhausting at times.
Definitely.
But I love it. I do enjoy it.
And I had asked you to think about what's something about Robbinsdale that people out there might not be aware of, to share some interesting fact about your city with our audience.
Yeah, I guess, Robbinsdale was founded in 1893.
Okay.
And Robbinsdale is fully developed since 1975. And residents, there's about 14,000 residents in Robbinsdale. We'll continue to grow a little bit. But so it's a community that's been around a long time.
Yes.
Back in the day, Robbinsdale was actually kind of a destination for hunting, fishing, for those that lived in Minneapolis. Back then, going 10 miles on a horse was a journey.
Right.
So, but a lot has changed, but Robbinsdale still kind of has, the downtown character and the small community feel next to the largest city in the state. So it's a very unique spot, and a lot of passionate people that live there. And it's starting to become a destination. So for those that haven't been to Robbinsdale, there's lots, as far as eating and some other shopping and some new things coming along that people can come and enjoy. So,
one of the new things is that Robbinsdale had actively put in some new bicycle trails this summer. Now, how many bicycle and walking trails are there in Robbinsdale, kind of overall, roughly?
Boy, well, the grid system that we have in Robbinsdale, we have a lot of sidewalks, which have been traditionally dedicated for biking and pedestrians. However, that has changed as we improve the connectivity between some of the regional trails in the city. There are more dedicated bike paths and bike lanes actually in streets. So it's kind of this multi-pronged approach where, for example, when we redo a street, we look at whether or not it's feasible to put in a bike lane. We partnered with 3 Rivers to improve or connect some trails from the Theaterworth to the Crystal Lakes Regional Trail. So the partnerships have helped a lot, from the funding side and the design and implementing, but we're doing things in Robbinsdale as well. We're just when we do redo streets. So I would say we've put in more paths in the last probably 5 years than in the last 10 years.
Well, it's a real growth recreation area, especially for families, but for all groups, all ages, I think.
It is, and it's not just a recreation. It's also more of a mode of transportation, all year round for people.
Right.
And with Minneapolis being one of the top 10 bike cities in the U.S., having that connectivity is beneficial for us to take advantage of that amenity. So we were able to do that. It was cool.
And where are the new trails that were put in, and kind of how will people recognize them?
Yeah, so that was one nice thing partnering with Three Rivers is they do a great job. They have a lot of experience with wayfinding.
Right.
So one of the trails, it's right near North Memorial. As you pass the hospital on and get on the Victory Memorial Drive, you take a little left along Bottineau Boulevard, and that trail goes all the way down to Twin Lake, and you can take that up through Crystal, all the way up 81, and I think eventually to Elm Creek. And then there's another part of the trail that you kind of jaunt through Brooklyn Center, and you can head towards the Mississippi Regional Park over there off 94. So that one is basically along Bottineau Boulevard. And there's a cool little boardwalk part of the trail that extends out into Crystal Lake, which is an amazing amenity that residents really enjoy that. It offers a whole new different perspective on the lake. And, so it's kind of a nice little place.
When it warms up, I'll have to explore that. I didn't realize it went out on the lake.
It's kind of hidden. Cool. Yeah, you wouldn't know it unless you're walking the path. So absolutely.
Now, to put something like that in place, particularly when you're working with another entity, how long does it take? What goes into the planning and process to make it happen, from somebody's idea to?
Well, it was several years from the idea where we started talking to Three Rivers and asking them to invest, into this trail. But once we kind of came to an agreement, it was about a year and a half from the time that there's planning. It's very challenging. Like I mentioned, Robbinsdale's been developed since 1975. So to put in a new trail in Minnetrista, which is undeveloped, it's pretty simple. But in Robbinsdale, there's a lot more to it. So we had to acquire some right-of-way from some businesses, from some residents to meet the standards that they have for their trails. So that took a little bit more time, and then of course the planning, and then we had public meetings as well. So it was about 2 years, kind of from start to finish.
Yeah, and I don't think people realize how much goes in before they can visibly see something.
Right, there's a lot to it, moving power lines and changing the approaches on the curbs, and so it was a good experience. And actually they just finished the trails before the snow fell, right before Thanksgiving. So we're going to try to maintain them during the winter time, but they got painted and there's signs, and so they're ready to go.
Right. And now, do you have any other plans for some more trails in the future, or will that just kind of sit till you're ready to do something?
Yeah, I think at this point, this will probably just, whenever we have some sort of redevelopment, I think we're just more conscious of it. And I think developers are as well. So it's not just cities. So whenever something new happens, it's definitely something that we look at adding. In fact, we had somebody at a council meeting last night that ride several miles every day and wonder what they could do to have us increase the bike paths, and a big part of it is safety too.
Oh, definitely. Something that's been going on for a very long time is now it's the blue line extension, not the Bottineau Light Rail Transit. So it's even changed names, right? But maybe you can give us a little history that's led up to where it's at now.
Well, light rail conversation has been going on for well over 10 years. George Selman, one of our council members, has been involved for quite some time. But more recently, in 2010, the Hennepin County Railroad Authority kind of designated a couple options for the Blue Line extension. And then in 2012, a recommendation was made on one particular route, which is the route we've been working on right now, which goes through Minneapolis, Golden Valley, Robbinsdale, Crystal, and Brooklyn Park. And then between 2010 and up to 2012 and then beyond, working on an environmental impact survey. And so there's quite a process to go through, and all the while having all the meetings and the public hearings and opportunities for the public to
and
learn.
Lots of meetings about it, right?
Right. There's been a lot of contact with the community, which is essential. And so as we've progressed, through the environmental impact survey, kind of now we've just got recent, budget estimates and scope for the project. And we had a meeting in November regarding that, and then December 10th.
Okay.
There'll be another meeting where we'll eventually vote on the final budget and scope of the project, and then that'll go to the Met Council. They'll vote on that, and then the timeline will continue after the first of the year, January, February, March. Then each of the cities that are affected by this particular route will do municipal consent. So each city council will kind of yay or nay.
Right. Now, maybe we should tell people that this is under the auspices of the Met Council, but kind of how cities are involved, or which cities are involved in the Blue Line extension.
Yeah, so I mentioned the Hennepin County Railroad Authority kind of started the project, but then that got handed over to the Met Council in 2012. I think it might have been later that. Regardless, Met Council is managing the project right now. And then, each of the cities that along the route are heavily involved. And so we have kind of a lot of acronyms.
Oh, definitely.
And one is CMC, that's Corridor Management Committee, and that's comprised of city council members and mayors and various leaders from other groups, try to represent the all the parties that are affected by transportation and the route itself. So, but yeah, it's been Met Council's heavily involved, and as well as Hennepin County.
And if people are wanting to get more information about the whole thing, Met Council's website is probably the best place to go under Blue Line Extension, right?
Yeah, in fact, bluelineextension.org is a dedicated page, but also you can go to Met Council and find it through there. And on there you'll find all the information as far as meetings. There's no meetings upcoming, but there are numerous meetings, I think 4 or 5 in the last 4 or 5 months.
Right.
And it's always ongoing. It doesn't have to be a meeting to receive public input. You can go online and submit comments at any time.
Right.
But on that website too, it talks about the timeline and all the specifics for the project, and everything is kept on there. So that's the place to go for information.
Right. If somebody wants more information. Now, what's the next steps? The next step is for each city to give their stamp of approval, right?
That basically it. Yeah, municipal consent is what they refer to it, and within that, each city will look at the project and make sure that it's going to be done to the standards and to the level that they expect. Because for each of these cities, this is going to be a major project. Certainly for Robbinsdale, it'll probably be one of the biggest changes or biggest projects since the reconstruction of Highway 100, or maybe even the building of Highway 100. So it's going to have a lot of impact, and so we want to make sure that whatever is done in Robbinsdale is done correctly, so we can maintain the character of our downtown. We can make sure that it's safe and not completely disruptive to the residents. And so after municipal consent, the rest of the timeline from there, they're looking at in 2016 would be engineering, and then 2018 would be heavy construction, and then 2020 to 2021 would be the opening of the line.
It's a long-term process.
It is, and there's still funding that needs to be sealed up too, so that's something that's hasn't been done yet either. So.
But we just thought, let people know kind of where it's at now.
Yeah, no, and you know what? It's because it is a big project. It's one of those things where we try to encourage people to get involved.
Oh, yes.
And when I say get involved, I mean just find out about the project, because there's so many people that don't know that it's going along the rail corridor, and it's not going to be on the same track as freight. The freight rail is going to be moving over. They're going to be adding 2 more tracks for light rail. things like that. People should certainly
Be
find
aware,
out.
right.
Right, because what I know the other city council members don't want to have happen is we really want to avoid, once it starts getting built, then people going, wait a second, what's going on here, right? So we want to avoid all of those issues and make sure it's done right the first time, because you get one shot.
Right.
So
the city council has been very involved as the process moves along with a number of other citizens that have come to the public input meetings.
Yeah, that, and there's other committees too. There's a citizen advisory committee, the CAC. There's the BAC, the Business Advisory Committee, and so there's not only the meetings that we have for the general public, but then we also have groups of businesses and other involved parties.
I read an article in the Star Tribune that was dealing with suburbs embracing tax increment financing, and people maybe hear the term, but they might not know a lot about it. But now I believe it was originally set up to deal with blighted areas of the city and to bring in new jobs. Maybe you can tell about what are some of the changes in that program, the tax increment financing program, that you've seen over your time on the council?
Well, yes, tax increment financing is a tool municipalities can use to, for redevelopment where redevelopment might not happen otherwise in the private sector. And it's been around for quite some time. There's been a lot of changes, and each state has different statutes addressing tax increment financing. But essentially, how the program works is, for a blighted building that qualifies for tax increment financing, like in Robbinsdale, it's not a hotspot. Traditionally, had not been a hotspot for developers.
Right.
So the market was not taking care of this blighted building.
Right.
So tax increment financing would allow the city to entice a developer to come in and use tax increment financing to redevelop the building. So let's say it's a $1 million building.
Right.
By redeveloping the building, and maybe it becomes a $5 million building. How the increment financing works is that improvement in taxes over time we would kind of take that up front to use that as an incentive for the redevelopment. And then what happens is that the tax over that period of time, I think it could be up to 20 years, it doesn't go to the school or the county. It just goes right to the city until that district ends. So we're able to kind of collect that money back over time, increment financing. So it's a tool, and it's been a great tool for Robbinsdale. We've used it both in kind of the scattered site, but then also in commercial buildings.
So that it can only be used for certain purposes, though.
Correct. There are numerous stipulations on how you can use that. So generally what we do, if there's consultants that we end up having to hire to help us decide whether or not we can do it, and if it's economically feasible for us to do it. It can be pretty complicated. And
it's something that people hear about, but they aren't always clear on what's happening on it. But it does, the increment that comes in, doesn't it generally allow the city to get the site prepared for the business?
Yeah, there's a number of different things you can do. You could use the money to discount, if you will, the cost of the building.
Okay.
You can use it for improvements of the building. But generally, a lot of times it's involved in some form or fashion in the redevelopment of the site. So.
And so then cities have to, like you said, get some added information so they don't do too much of it, because it does take away from the county and the school district's taxes for a period of time.
Right. Yep. And you have to make sure that the money works out over that period of time. And So yeah, it gets pretty complicated.
It's kind of a balancing act in terms of how much is going to be good for a city and how much might, because if you've got a certain amount of your increased taxes going to pay back something already, it's not going for current needs, right?
Yeah, it's one of those where while it's a great tool, it's something that I guess use in moderation, and that's why I think it's worth the consultants that we do hire.
Oh, yeah.
To make sure that it is viable and works for us.
And the payback time, there's varying amounts of time. If it gets to be too long, isn't that a problem for the city? Or not? What do you think?
I couldn't answer that. Okay. I know there's it's something that we talk a lot, not too often about, but when we do, it's generally with one of our attorneys,
right?
that get involved in those things. But yeah, there's a lot of rules and they change often.
Oh,
I
right,
noticed within the last couple of years. It's actually been a little bit easier to utilize tax increment financing, because there was a time where it was harder for municipalities to do it. But lately it's been easier for cities to use it.
And then it has to get approved through the state legislature, right?
Yeah,
or they have a role in the whole process.
Yeah, for any changes, in that program, the legislature's involved. Yep.
So how many tax increment financing districts? Because you have to declare the area that you're going to work on.
Right.
As a district, right?
Yep.
That you're working on. How many does Robbinsdale have? Roughly.
I would say it was probably close to 10.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, we have quite a few. Some, like I mentioned, some commercial and some residential.
Right.
And then it evolves, because some, as over time,
they get paid off. Right.
Right.
So it's definitely a tool that is probably important for cities to have.
Yeah, I can say right now, with Claire Terrace, with Travail, with Lions Gym, all of those were through tax increment financing, and I can say with some certainty that those projects would not have happened without that tool.
Now, one of the things all of the cities are working on and just about got completed is the budget for 2016. And what's happening with that whole process, and where is Robbinsdale at?
Yeah, so just last night we had a long, lengthy discussion on our budget, and we voted on the budget, and then we'll finalize that our next meeting in December before we submit that to the county. So, it's a lengthy process that starts, the beginning of the year, budgeting, and then we have public hearings and work sessions, and so we kind of get ready to finalize it.
And by the time you get to September, then you have to determine what's the most that you're going to levy.
Correct.
And that is the most you can do, but you still have to keep deciding if that's where you're going to end up. So what kind of levy is Robbinsdale going to do for 2016?
Yeah, so you are correct. You can lower it, but you can't raise it.
After September.
Yep. And so like last night, we could have had the opportunity to make some changes, but we could not increase it. So Robbinsdale, this year, we had a slight increase in LGA.
Okay.
Very minimal. But we had a large decrease in fiscal disparities, which is, it's part of our property taxes, and it's the amount of money that it's kind of profit sharing, just for lack of a better term with other commercial. I'll just use Mall of America as an example in Bloomington. We don't have the opportunity to have that type of business in Robbinsdale, because of our size and we're developed. So we kind of share in the property taxes that are generated. It's called fiscal disparities. And there's calculations that are way beyond our pay grade to figure out what that number is, right?
Right.
So we had a large decrease in that this year. So that was, part of revenue that
definitely
that hurt us. So, but to answer your question, we're going to increase the levy 1.12%.
Okay, that's pretty low, right?
Right, from last year to this year. But then with we had to increase it about 3.87% because of that reduction in fiscal disparities.
Yeah.
So it's up to 4.99%. But we also used some of our reserves to decrease that. Otherwise, it would have been over 5%. So just looking at our levy, it's an increase of $50,000. For the city
From last year to this
right.
up and coming
But because
year.
of fiscal disparities and having to deal with that big cut, the levy is going to go up a little bit. So. That's
And
where we're at.
then the last thing you do is have a hearing where people can respond to your budget. Has Robbinsdale had theirs yet?
Yeah, we had a public hearing last night, and then we will have one more before we make the final decision, I believe.
So it's definitely a long process, and if people are interested, they can check with their cities and kind of follow along. Because a few people like that kind of thing. But
yeah, it's a lot of. Say most people put a lot of trust in their council and their mayor to make these kinds of decisions and don't get too caught up into it. But we had some people come to the meeting last night, brought up some great points on some things, and it helps. I mean, we're here to represent residents, and we're residents too.
Right.
And so we need that feedback, from people to help give us direction on certain things. And so there are some features of our budget. We're going to be hiring another sergeant on the police department. We're going to be hiring a water resource specialist. And a little background on that, the state is mandating additional testing.
Oh, right.
And has put the burden on us. And so we basically had to hire somebody to accommodate, all these different things that we're required to do. Right. Which is unfortunate. That's another show topic.
Another whole issue.
Right.
I'll have to look into that. Right.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I'll have to talk to our state representatives about that. There's just a lot of things that the additional burdens put on municipalities and that we I guess need to plan for now.
Right.
So there's that, and what we're trying to do is keep service for the citizens, where they are and where people expect them to be. And part of that is code enforcement, which is probably the most emails and calls I get are about properties that are maybe uncapped or some issues. So we are going to add some help on code enforcement because that's become, especially with additional rentals, rental licensing. We need the help there. But other than that, as far as the capital expenditures, I mean, there's nothing big. Right. We're still kind of budget that, it's just nothing crazy. Right.
Yep. Well, I want to thank you very much.
Of course, thank you.
Got a lot of information for those of you out there in Robbinsdale. And then remember to contact your mayor and city council people if any of the issues tonight were ones that were of concern to you. Bye.